welcome to the show. Glenn Greenberg's back, and I'm so excited to talk with you. Welcome back to the show, man.
Thank you for inviting me back.
Oh, my pleasure. We've actually had correspondence over the last while. I want to say it's been probably a year since the last time you were on.
Mhm.
But we've been talking back and forth about like, oh, we should have you back. And every time we talk, I'm like, you should come back. And you're like, call me. And I'm like, right. It's on me. It's my show. But
true.
if you guys aren't not familiar with Glenn Greenberg, you should check out that episode we did together where we talked all about like kind of behind the veil at Marvel during a really interesting time. And we're going to talk more about that as well. And kind of like how that reflects on today and how history is so important for so many reasons. And as we live in considerably and continuingly historical times, it is only more relevant and important to remember what came before so that you can inform what's coming and maybe, you know, look into a crystal ball and figure out how to navigate the present or the future itself. But Glenn, you were an editor and a writer at Marvel during, oh man, Onslaught, Age of Apocalypse, the Clone Saga, so much during Marvel. So many movers and shakers, friends of yours and colleagues as well, and I can't wait to chat about that. So that's our little intro. Welcome to the show. But yeah, man. So I would love to jump into anywhere because I feel like as the show is, we follow the tangents and the conversations just flow from there, and we just take one story point and go in any direction. Off mic, we're talking about just the world itself of comics, but like you worked on so many books that are formative. Hey, the Amalgam and DC crossovers are now in omnibus form, and I would have taken like a blood oath to get that thing off the ground, and I would have swore up and down they were. And I think I'm on record saying they'll never do it.
Right.
And here we are, and you get a copy of these. Do you have them, or do you need them? Because they printed like 10 million copies per issue, so you probably have your own. But like, have you seen them?
Yeah, I pre-ordered the DC versus Marvel crossovers book the day it was announced, and not just because I edited one of those books, one of the stories in there, which was we talked about it last time, Superman
Hulk.
The Incredible Hulk versus Superman.
Yes.
So I ordered that. The Amalgam stuff. I don't know. I was less enthusiastic about that even when I was working on the stuff. I was the assistant editor on a lot of the Amalgam stuff.
Yeah.
And there were a few books that I enjoyed, but for the most part, it was kind of gimmicky to me. So I wasn't all that enthusiastic about it. But I did know that they were putting out the omnibus of that as well. I just saw it in the store last week. And I was like, "Oh, okay, it's out. I hope people enjoy it, But it's not going to be on my bookshelf.
Fair.
Not because I hated it. It's an expensive book. And
it is an expensive book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I didn't love the material enough to want to shell out that kind of money.
That's fair. I've heard, and I haven't looked at it because I have it sealed in my house, and not that I'm not going to open an omnibus. I'm not that attentive about that kind of comic book collecting. But I got a copy of the Amalgam omnibus, and it was the cover. I didn't want the cover that it came with, and so I had to reorder the Jim Lee variant because, of course, it's not enough that it's like, oh my god, they took all these books and they put it all out. But Jim Lee, publisher of DC Comics and uber artist extraordinaire, the first time you've seen new Amalgam versions of these characters, drawn by anybody in the last 25, 30 years, but drawn by Jim Lee. I should probably pick this up. So my Jim Lee cover is on the way. And I got it, by the way.
Well, who did the other cover? The cover that you got? Was that Dave Gibbons?
I don't know who did the cover, but I can tell you that it was the artist who did the cover for the Amalgam Age of Comics collection, Volume 2.
Oh, okay.
So not the one that you worked on with the books that includes Challenge of the Fantastic, Excite X Patrol, Spider-Boy Team Up, Magnetic Men, and Thorian, and so forth. This is the other one with like Dark Claw. But that cover was kind of just like, and it was when they announced it that I saw that cover and thought, oh, okay, like this is how it's going to be, where they were just going to slap on whatever they had left over, whatever the highest res PDF we have. Just put that on the cover and get it out.
Right.
But that was it was just a reprint of the old cover. And
okay.
Thankfully, forgivably, at least with DC versus Marvel, they did have, I think when they announced it, there was the that like kind of really slapdash, hesitate to use the term, but like I think it was John Romita Jr.
Yeah.
Yeah, that cover for like one of the quick and dirty trade paperbacks they made.
Right.
And then triumphantly the George Perez crossover classics cover was resurrected, and I'm like, hot dog, that's the one I got.
I got the George cover. Yeah, I
got the George cover. I don't have it literally offhand, but I have it 8 feet away from me. And, oh man. But I heard, and this is from I think Ron Mars himself who mentioned it, that the Amalgam collection has so much extra data in it. Like basically he gave them everything he had. Like notes and expense reports, like everything that could possibly be about the books and what he did on them are in there. And you could tell that whoever edited it was just like, we may never get another crack at this. We better we've got to shove it all in there.
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking alternate pages of the DC versus Marvel outcomes are in there.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Which is another reason to have it. Also, I don't know. This is a stickler in me, and I know we're chatting with you, but like, I apologize. The DC versus Marvel Omnibus collects all of the great DC Marvel crossovers that they've had, not including JLA Avengers.
Right.
But in order to get DC versus Marvel, the series, you must buy the Amalgam book.
Right.
I'm like,
Right. Which makes sense because a lot of the
it's integrated.
It's all integrated. Yeah, it's all I think that I think that was the right way to go.
It was the right way to go, but I find it like I would have rather they call it crossover classics than DC versus Marvel. But if they're gonna call it DC versus Marvel, I can't believe that DC changed their logo to the old Bullet logo after they made the printing. I'm like,
yeah, well.
It's again, it's just the uber nerd in me that's just like, oh man, why can't they have that?
I'm glad you said it.
Right? Yeah, exactly. But it is modern. It does look nice.
It looks great. They did a terrific job, and I'm just glad that they fixed the color mistake in the second Superman versus Spider-Man book.
Oh, no kidding.
Every time they've reprinted, it was fine in the original printing in 1981, but every time they've reprinted that story, they screwed up the coloring on Superman. Where and I would say 3/4 of the book, his costume is like ranging in the green realm.
Yes.
You know what I'm talking about?
I know exactly what you're talking about because I know that book well, unfortunately.
Okay. That's in that's in all of the reprints.
In all the reprints, yeah.
Including the crossover classic trade paperback. Well, the day they announced, and I'm not taking credit for this, but the day they announced the omnibus, I reached out to Marie Javins and I said, congratulations, this is great news. And she was like, she goes, yeah, I think I've performed my last miracle.
Yeah.
But I said to her, I said, if you're going to be putting out this book and you're going to be charging $150 cover price, you got to fix the Superman Spider-Man, the second book with the coloring mistake. And she had no idea what I was talking about.
Of course.
And I sent her scans and she said that, she would look into it. Now I'm not taking credit. Somebody at DC, might have like noticed the mistake when they were going and said, okay, we've got to fix this.
Yeah.
But I do know that I let Marie Javins, the editor-in-chief of DC, know.
Yeah.
And
I think you got to take some credit because listen, you never know until you're looking for it. Right. And I can imagine, you're a young buck who was born after 9/11 and you're like looking through these pages, just, absolutely putting them in going, I guess he's green in this one. I see the Hulk's in this crossover too. So I mean, it makes sense to me. Maybe he's got kryptonite poisoning. Moving on. But it's like, no. That's not what it should look like.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
So if my comment to Marie helped fix that correction, I'm thrilled. I'm just glad it was done. It was fixed, and it looks great. And I'm glad it's out there. I hope everybody who wanted one got one because Lord knows if this is ever going to be reprinted.
Well, and that's the thing that kills me is that like it's all just money on the table. There's so many things that need to be reprinted or need to be out there in the world. And when I say need to, in the back of my mind, I have a couple of omnibus suggestions that I've made to a few movers and shakers who have definitely deleted my email address as a result of that conversation. But that conversation is like, I when I say need to, I mean, I'm talking about things like Bloodlines or Armageddon 2001 and things that like have never been reprinted or never been collected and could make some money. But I like the idea of chronicling / remembering your history and having these tomes on hand. JLA Avengers was produced and printed during an age when this isn't like, and I forgive me because you were there during that time, but I feel like the DC versus Marvel crossover that happened in '96, I want to say.
Well, Ben Reilly was still Spider-Man, so maybe it was like 90. Oh no, wait, Mark Grunwald died in '96, and he was one of the prime movers and shakers of that. So I would say more like 95, maybe early 96.
Yeah. But the Marks were the reason why that book even existed, because as I understand it, they were like neighbors and they would hang out and talk. And that eventually, not just the fact that they wanted to see it, but also, I mean, the industry was in tumult and needed a shot.
The Marks?
I understand that like both Mark Grunwald and Mark, I don't remember who the editor was at DC at the time, but he also had
Mike Carlin.
I'm sorry. Yeah. Mike Carlin and Mark Doyle. And I'm thinking of
Mark Grunwald.
Mark Grunwald.
Yeah. Well, Mike Carlin, when he first got into comics, he was Mark Grunwald's assistant.
Oh, wow.
They were the best of friends. Even when Mike went over to DC to do Superman,
yeah,
he and Grooney remained the best of friends. So the Marvel versus DC project was that was just the two of them getting a chance to work together again.
Exactly. Which I think is just a beautiful synergistic way to see, unexpected comics come into light. But you're not going to see that kind of like verbal agreement handshake kind of deal when in a world where Disney owns Marvel and Warner Brothers / whatever parent company owns Warner Brothers today owns DC. So, but I remember with JLA Avengers, when they produced that, like that was when all the T's were crossed and all the I's were dotted. Like that book should have been published in perpetuity. Like when there was a beautiful oversized hardcover that also collected the George Perez pages that he had no business drawing in the first place.
The original,
that book should have been out all the time. And in fact, DC, I believe, published that book themselves. Like that was kind of in their thing and was up for sale. I remember seeing it up as recently as 2012. I remember seeing that book purchasable. Like you could just go on dc.com and buy the hardcover through the website. Yeah. And then out of print, gone forever. And I'm like, how is it you could, like, how does that happen? And so I definitely gobbled up my own omnibuses because I'm like, look, in today's world, if you're publishing an omnibus, you got to have all that stuff taken care of. You got to have all that cleaned up, but still you could have, I don't know, ego or just some other company gets bought by another company and suddenly that deal's off the table.
Right. Yeah. I was talking to the collections editor at Marvel not too long ago. And he was like saying, I was telling him, how good the Godzilla omnibus looks.
Yeah.
And he said, well, you better, make sure you take care of your copy. And if you want copies of like the Micronauts and ROM, snatch those up because the chances are you're never going to see them again.
Oh, how is that possible? I understand that, there's rights and there's lawyers, but like you paid these lawyers to set this up, it up for the next 10, 15, 20 years. There are contracts in place to make sure these things stay in print at the very least. Or you pull in a 90's Marvel and just overprint it. Just print like 10 million copies. Because I remember finding a couple of Amalgam books in dollar bins up until about like a year or two ago and being like, I might as well gobble one of these up. You never know. But I always find one because they printed so damn many of them.
Right.
But getting off the crossover train for a minute, because I believe you and I talked exclusively about crossovers
We
and the
did.
Amalgam stuff in the last episode, and
Yeah.
it is exciting. And I think actually that's what like brought us together, was you reaching out and being like, "Hey, I worked on you seem to like crossovers," and I do, and you could tell I'm excited by them. But
Yeah.
there's a particular period at Marvel that you were there for, and in fact wrote one of the books from, that I was fascinated about, but know virtually nothing about its formation. And that is the Star Trek Marvel Paramount Comics initiative.
Oh.
When out of nowhere, first you got the Star Trek X-Men crossover, which kind of like brought the whole thing about.
Right.
But in the back of that book, there's this really aggressive initiative where Marvel's like, here are 6 books
Right.
using the Star Trek license, including like a Voyager book, a Deep Space Nine book, a TNG book, or rather an original series and TNG shared book.
Yeah.
And so much more.
Mhm.
You wrote the Untold Voyages, at least a couple of issues of it.
No, I wrote. It was a limited series. I wrote the whole limited series, 5
All
issues.
right, that's great.
Yeah.
I never know what's a limited series and what just, because Paramount Comics or Marvel Paramount Comics, it doesn't exist within one calendar year. Like it starts and ends, and then I never know what was meant to be an ongoing and what wasn't. Although I think Starfleet Academy lasted like, I want to say at least
quite a while,
plus
about 20. Yeah, about 20, 22 issues, something like that.
Yeah. Obscene. Not that it's unasked for, but I was like, I'm amazed this book managed to survive. But do you from your recollection, how did that kind of come about, or how did your involvement come about with that? This is definitely for the general audiences, because they really want to hear about Star Trek and how it and their comic book adaptations from 30 years ago. But I was fascinated by it, because Marvel seemed to be like, "Oh, hot dog, we got Star Trek, everybody, let's go all in."
Right. Well, I'll try to give you the Reader's Digest version, because it's very long and a lot of permutations. But bottom line is, around the time this would have been around 1995, 96. Maybe a little bit later. But anyway, we made the deal with Rob Liefeld and Jim Lee to do Heroes Reborn.
Yeah.
Which meant that we, Marvel Editorial, was going to be losing numerous books, because they were going to be going over exclusively to Lee and Liefeld. So we were looking to beef up our line to make up for the books that we were losing. And I remember distinctly that there were 2 licenses we were going after. We were going after Star Trek, because DC was losing Star Trek. I only found out recently the reason why DC was losing Star Trek. Well, DC was owned by Warner Brothers, and Star Trek is owned by Paramount. And apparently, one day, somebody at Paramount realized that DC Comics was owned by Warner Brothers, and said, "Hey, why are we letting Warner Brothers publish a series about our characters? Let's end this license." Let's have somebody else publish it. We don't want a rival studio publishing our characters. I was like, wow, okay. It only been there for like 10 years at that point. But
seriously, we're talking like multiple titles, dozens of issues, if not like Baker's dozens. That's nuts.
Yeah.
That it comes from just someone upstairs going, "Hey."
Right. So the license became available. The other license we went after was Star Wars, because Dark Horse's contract with Lucasfilm was about to expire. So I remember being in the office and looking at promotional stuff that we drew up to give to Lucasfilm to say, "Look, this is what our Star Wars comics would look like."
Yeah.
So that was like
That's
the last
incredible.
I heard. Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's incredible, because if you know your Star Wars history, that's around the time of Shadows of the Empire, and its marketing blitz that Lucas was using to ramp up towards the Power of the Force action figure line, and of course the prequels. I imagine that Marvel might have either been given some inkling about this initiative, because Dark Horse, of course, did the comic book tie-in, but man, yeah, Marvel, that would have been a real feather in their cap to have gotten that level of exposure, because that was the like movie without the movie marketing,
Right.
where it was like they had this one novel, Shadows of the Empire, and they were like,
Right.
we're going to do a soundtrack, a video game, a comic book
Comic book
tie-in, like
series and
and an action
all that
figure
stuff.
line, and we're going to do all these things around this movie that doesn't
That
exist.
doesn't exist, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, man.
I think this might have been a little bit after that. I think
Okay.
this might have been a little bit after that, but I do remember seeing the promotional art that for the pitch that we were going to submit.
Yeah.
And the next thing I knew, we struck a deal with Paramount, and it was starting with a comic book tie-in to the first Tom Cruise Mission Impossible movie. That was the first. That was the first project, and it was going to kick off the Paramount Comics line, and then boom, we've got Star Trek, and we wanted to get a lot of attention for that. So what do? We do the crossover between Star Trek and X-Men, and a lot of people scoffed at it. A lot of people thought it was awful. I thought it was, I knew the spirit in which it was created, so I didn't have a problem with it. I thought it was fun enough.
Yeah.
And then we took it from there. And how I got involved was I was an editor at Marvel, and I was hanging out in the office of Tim Toohey, who was another editor at Marvel. He was one of the Star Trek editors, and it was after hours, and we basically had our feet up on his desk and just sort of shooting the poopy after hours. And I said, you know what you should do? I said, remember when Marvel had the license the first time in the late 70s, early 80s, and they couldn't really do anything with it because they were limited to only what was in Star Trek the Motion Picture. They couldn't use, anything from the TV series that wasn't in the movie. So I said, well, you don't have those restrictions anymore. What if you did a new series or a limited series set during that era? It's basically, we're going to do the old Marvel series, but we're going to do it right this time,
Yeah.
And the editor, Tim, the editor, was like, I'm listening. And I just kept sort of spinning, more and more and more was coming out of me. And I have to say, I was not, campaigning.
You were not lobbying to be the Star Trek guy.
Right. And I wasn't lobbying to work on this project. I was just offering an idea to a good friend,
Yeah.
And so I'm like, and it could be a limited series, 5 issues for each year of the second 5-year mission. And you go, you go 1 year deeper, and you can have, you can show why Spock did this. And, you could basically set up where all the characters are in the second movie.
Right.
And, make a long story short, Tim was like, well, what are you sitting here for? Go home and write the pitch. And I'm like, me? He goes, yeah, it's your idea. I said, oh, really? I said, okay. So I went home, I wrote the pitch, and he submitted it to Paramount, and boom, approved.
It's amazing.
And that's how it came together. But by the time we did Untold Voyages, the license was coming to an end. We almost didn't publish the 5th issue because Marvel wanted to end the deal as quickly as possible. And another series ended right in the middle of a story. It ended on a cliffhanger. So that almost happened. Not that we had a cliffhanger, but we would have ended an issue earlier if Tim hadn't made a good case to just sort of let us go one more month and get those issues out.
Yeah. Now, what was the cause of the license ending? Was it because Marvel was reaching insolvency, or was it because Paramount wasn't happy?
No, Paramount was happy. I think a big the story that I heard was that Marvel's president du jour at the time, because we were going through presidents
tissue paper. I know.
It was ridiculous. Every couple of weeks, it seemed like we had it was almost they built a turnstile up on the executive floor to basically he woke up one day and said, why are we paying to publish another company's characters? We should be putting all of our time and effort into publishing our characters.
Right.
And making our characters as successful as they can be. We why are we spending money paying for other people's characters? That, from what I understand, was the real impetus behind it. There could be more. I mean, Tim was more actively involved in the inner workings of this than I was. I suspect that it was also a case of maybe Paramount decided to re-up. If we wanted to re-up the deal.
Sure,
we'd have to pay more. That's what ended that's what ended Marvel's deal with Toho, for the Godzilla series back in the 70s. The book was selling well. Marvel canceled it because the license fee was going to go up. So it could be something as simple as that.
That's interesting,
But the president of Marvel didn't feel like it was justifiable to keep paying a licensing fee for another company's characters.
Yeah, despite the fact that there were literally like 60 plus Star Trek books being published by Marvel at that point. Like that's and a Snake Plissken issue. Which I was
not there a Snake Plissken issue?
Evidently, yeah. Under the Paramount license, there was one Snake Plissken issue, which was not called Escape from Anywhere. It was just called The Adventures of Snake Plissken, which
I do not remember that. That completely flew under my radar.
Yeah, no, that was 97. Oh man, now I want to read that. That was Len Kaminsky, I believe.
Okay.
But yeah, that's so that's how Marvel's Paramount Comics kind of came and went within, again, like a calendar year.
Well, I mean, if they got more than 20 issues out of Starfleet Academy, then there was about 2 years.
Yeah,
roughly 2 years.
19.
It was 19 issues of Starfleet
19
Academy?
issues of Starfleet Academy.
Okay, then yeah, under 2 years.
Just shy. No, nothing broke the 20 issue barrier.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, weird. But it's one of those things where it came up, and a friend of mine came in to co-host one of the episodes we do on the other channel, and I was like, oh, we got to do Star Trek X-Men, because he's a huge Star Trek fan, and it took me down the rabbit hole, and I'm like, man, the Paramount Comics, like, look at how robust and deliberate this initiative is. It's like I haven't seen Marvel tackle anything that aggressively in a long time.
Yeah.
And so it was always kind of curious to me. So I love getting that information.
I made 2 contributions to Star Trek X-Men. And I'll tell you what they were, because I heard the news that we were doing it, and I heard that Scott Lobdell was going to be writing it. And Scott was always around the offices. He was always walking through the halls. So I just heard about Star Trek X-Men, and I literally grabbed him by the arm, and I said, there's 2 things you have to do. I said, first, at some point, Captain Kirk should flirt with Storm or Jean Grey.
Yes.
I don't know if that made it into the book.
It did. No, he flirted with Jean. Yeah.
Okay. The second thing I said is there has to be a moment where somebody says Dr. McCoy and Bones and the Beast both turn at the same time and say yes.
Those are yours. Those two. One of the most memorable. I think the most memorable moment of Star Trek X-Men is the Dr. McCoy yes reaction.
I basically told Scott, I said, you have to have this in there, you know?
Yeah.
It was like the same way when John Byrne told Frank Miller, when Frank Miller was doing Dark Knight Returns, and John Byrne said, well, of course, Robin has to be a girl.
Make her a girl. Yeah.
That's basically my kind of contribution to Star Trek X-Men.
Right. Yeah.
And I didn't even remember that Kirk hitting on Jean even made it into the book. I just remembered the Dr. McCoy bit.
Oh yeah,
I'm prouder of that.
It's very brief. He says something like she's doing something, and he's like, "Oh, only matched by your beauty." And she's like, "All right."
Okay.
Like, I'm married, and he's like, "Oh, okay, well."
All right.
Can't believe we got
Scott handled it well then.
Oh no, it's very seamless.
Yeah.
Although the book, I think, has like 4 or 5 different artists on it as well.
Yeah.
Which I was like, the book's only like 30 pages. I can't believe it needed that much work. I guess it's just to get it out on time.
Well, yeah, and also, I mean, I think it was Mark Silvestri was the primary artist, and Mark Silvestri's not gonna put his full effort into it.
Oh yeah, unless it was
Trek.
A passion project.
Yeah, it's not. It's a Star Trek comic. It's not looked upon as like prestige,
right?
It was fun. I mean, I think it came out well enough, and it was just done as a way to kick off the Star Trek line.
Sure.
And I mean, I think we did some good work on that Star Trek line. I think, I think, I mean, in my opinion, and in my heart of hearts, DC did the best job on Star Trek comics. I mean, it's just a lot of that is nostalgia, but I loved a lot of the stuff that Mike Barr did. I loved the stuff that Peter David did. I loved some of the stuff that Howard Weinstein did. It had some terrific artwork.
It did. Like there was some real talent behind that book. That's what I'm saying. Like, or that line was just it was aggressive. But I love that it came from we just gave away. Well, it may not gave away, certainly. I mean, I've heard the dollar value attached to Heroes Reborn, and all of that, but and I won't speculate about it here. I don't want to, put anybody on the hot seat here, but certainly, I love the idea that they were like, well, we just lost essentially like 3 or 4 different books. We need to fill out the line. How can we do that? How about licensed books? During a time when Star Trek was aggressively pursuing different. I mean, there was like, it was Voyager, Deep Space Nine, TNG was ending. Just a ton of, and all the movies, of course, were coming out at the same time. Just a real time.
Star Trek was it was booming at the time. Star Trek. It was around the time of the second Next Generation movie, First Contact, which was now a beloved movie. So yeah, I mean, it was, I think we did good work. I mean, did we match DC's level of quality? Hard to say. I
think it was, if I can speak from experience, having collected some of them out of just morbid curiosity, and they are as good as any Marvel book at the time. Like there's no, which but it wasn't like it was used less good quality paper or put fill-in artists on it. It was treated as seriously as any other like high-end tier book.
It definitely was. It definitely was. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of love put into it, and Tim, the thing about Tim is he's as much of a Star Trek fan as I am, and working with him was great. I mean, we got to the last issue of Untold Voyages. I mean, I was stuck. I came down with a case of, I guess you'd call it writer's block. I just didn't. I was having trouble coming up with a story, and we were starting to get, the deadline crunch was starting to, and I was starting to get, worried.
Oh, sure.
I finally had to go in and admit to Tim. I was like, Tim, I got nothing. I said, and Tim took, just looked at me and went, he gave me one word, which was, I don't know how much of a Star Trek fan you are, but
I dabble.
Okay. Tim says to me, the preservers. That was it. And a light bulb went off in my head, and I said, okay, I'm done. Got it. Thank you. And Tim said, my work here is done. And he walked off. And before you knew it, I had the plot written for issue number 5. But like, Tim could pull that kind of stuff and just say one word to me, and I would pick it up and take it from there, So it was great. I mean, there was a lot of passion, and it helped having people who knew the lore. I mean, Chris Cooper, who wrote Starfleet Academy, to this day, he and I still have arguments and debates about Star Trek lore, like whether the Klingons and the Romulans had an alliance, and that's how they got the cloaking device, and who had the cloaking device first. We still go back and forth about that kind of stuff. So it was the right people working on that stuff. I mean, Peter David is probably the best of all of us Star Trek comic book writers. I know that I aspire to reach those heights.
Yeah. It sounds like it was a much more like, it was a very collaborative space. We talked a little bit about how it was where you'd actually go to the, nowadays I can't even imagine why Marvel even has an office based on based on telecommuting and just the nature of publishing. It's like, write me a thing, send it to me. We'll have a meeting. It's like, we'll just go on Zoom. Like, why spend any money on residential space whatsoever? But it sounds like it was much more of an opportunity for everybody to kind of go to one collective place and be creative, or at least they're encouraged to be creative and say, like, hey, I'm having a trouble with this one thing, as you pointed out, like, I'm having trouble with this plot. How about this? And it's just so it was a lot more collaborative, which I think some spaces are trying to either like recreate, or maybe they don't recognize the value in them. But would you agree that it certainly was like a creative space that allowed for free flowing ideas, or was it kind of just an office like any other?
Oh no, it was not an office back then. I mean, it was I would describe it as an extension of my college years to a certain extent. That's what I mean. We were not buttoned up, straight laced, corporate kind of environment back then. I mean, we knew we had deadlines, we had to do our work, but there were like some editors who would come in at like 6 o'clock in the evening and work until like 3 o'clock in the morning.
Uh-huh.
Now part of that was because they were working primarily with British creators, so
Yeah.
to be able to call them, you have to be on their hours. But there were some people who would work from like 12 to 8, and there were people who work from 10 to 6, and nobody wore suits. It was just but every office had a couch that people could like come in and sit down and shoot the breeze, and you had freelancers visiting all the time, but there was a lot of camaraderie. There was a lot of back and forth and free flow exchange of ideas, but a lot of it was also because we were all on the same page. We all shared a passion, or at least most of us. I mean, there were people who were there, strictly as this is my job, but and I don't look down on that.
Sure.
That's totally fine. But the majority of the people who were there were all sort of like, all boats going in the same direction because of our shared passion. Not to disparage DC at the time, but I visited DC a few times. It was a completely different vibe. Really just a completely different vibe. And it was like,
what do you recall from that time? Like from your limited experience working or visiting with them?
Very political, very siloed, very sort of like, people sort of watching their backs, sort of like, making sure like, nobody could hear them talking freely kind of thing. It was just a really different vibe. And I will say that I'm not damning DC, because I've worked at a lot of other companies, and a lot of other companies are like that, just DC was just more corporate. And I think they would cop to that. They were more straight-laced. I mean, I remember being at a convention in the early 80s when getting back to our original topic, which was the crossovers, the DC Marvel crossovers.
Yeah.
And I was at a convention. I must have been around 12 years old, and they were talking about all the upcoming, X-Men, Teen Titans, and the original planned JLA Avengers, and all that. And the Marvel guys were so rowdy on this panel, and they were like, reaching into the pitcher of water and throwing ice cubes at each other, and throwing ice cubes at the DC guys. And the DC guys were like, just completely, just blank face, and just going to, hey guys, let's keep some order.
Keep it
here,
professional.
Let's keep, yeah. It was just like, as a 12-year-old, I was sitting like, boy, the Marvel guys seem a lot more fun to be around. It was just a corporate culture, and so. But Marvel was just like, if you came up with an idea for a series, you could get approval for it like within days, if not hours. You know, and I hear that like at DC, it would be much more like a long
have to
process.
go through the
and draft after draft after draft, for 6 to 8 months, if not longer. But we came up with stuff. I mean, Hobgoblin Lives, which was a limited series that I generated and edited. I think we got like, the whole project, like, conceived and approved within like 2-3 days, maybe.
Wow.
It was that quick.
Can you imagine? Because that's a book that was on my list of things that I wanted to bring up with you as well, was just because Hobgoblin Lives has been waiting, in the wings, it seems, since the original run of the introduction of Hobgoblin.
Since the day Roger Stern left.
Since the day Roger Stern left. It's been sitting there like, one day Roger Stern will come back and tell you who the real Hobgoblin is. But you're telling me that it really was just like hey, Roger doesn't seem so pissed anymore. Why don't we bring him back? And
Roger was never pissed. Roger was never pissed. Roger
speak out of turn.
No. Roger was never pissed. It's just like, if Roger was going to come back and do Spider-Man, he wanted to do to be the right thing. He didn't like the idea of a married Spider-Man, so he didn't really want to do anything, too much with a married Peter Parker and Mary Jane. But I was able to, dangle a carrot in front of him, which was, you're going to have to write a married Peter and Mary Jane, but you're also going to get to do your Hobgoblin story.
Right.
And no, he wasn't pissed at all. It was just like, we just had to entice him with the right project.
Right.
And, we were looking to do more Spider-Man projects. I knew Roger had this Hobgoblin story up his sleeve. I pitched it to my boss. He said, sounds good to me if you can get the editor-in-chief to sign off on it. So I went to the editor-in-chief. He said, well, we can't go forward unless we know who the Hobgoblin is. We got to know what Roger had in mind. So I call Roger. I tell him basically what the situation is. And I said, look, we can do this, but you got to tell me who the Hobgoblin is. I swear to God, I won't tell anybody.
Right.
And he confided in me and he explained how it would all work. And I said, okay, let me get back to you. Hang up the phone. I'm describing it exactly the way it went down.
Right. This is the, like, we're clocking you at like 15 seconds or so.
Hung up the phone, literally ran back to the editor-in-chief's office, explained it all to him. He said, okay. But he said, the one thing that he said it was, he said, make sure, because the Hobgoblin, we thought for the longest time that it was this guy, Ned Leeds, who was one of Peter Parker's friends. And he had been married to Peter Parker's first girlfriend, Betty Brant.
That's right.
So he said, look, if Roger's going to do this story, it really should be Betty's story, because she's the one who's going to be most affected by this. Basically, it's the exoneration of her husband.
That's
true. For all these years, we thought that her husband was this bad guy. I said, okay, get back on the phone with Roger. I pass all this on to him. He says, yeah, sure. Okay. Yeah, fine.
Yeah.
I said, all right. We just have to get it approved through the business people. We have to run what's called a P&L, profit and loss kind of report. And I was friends with the guy who did the P&Ls, and I went right to him. And I would say by the end of the week, we had the green light.
Yeah.
Boom, took it from there.
Now, was the idea to make it 3 issues a Stern idea, a your idea, or a P&L idea?
I think it was on the business end. What would be the best format for this? I didn't choose the format. I think the business guys came back to us and said, 3 issues, extra long issues, because they weren't the size of a regular monthly comic. I think it was 38 or 48 pages each. I don't remember. It's been a long time.
Yeah. I only have the trade. I don't have like the individuals, but
but it was I think it was 32 pages per issue, which is 10 pages longer than a regular comic book at the time.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's really cool, because like you could have Craven's Last hunted it and been like, oh no, this will be like a thing that happens across like all the titles, or really zhuzh it up with
it would have always been a separate limited series, because we weren't going to take work away from the guys who were doing the regular Spider-Man books at the time. Each book had its own regular team. So we weren't going to interrupt them or take work away from them. This was always going to be a limited series. I think Roger probably would have envisioned it as like a 6 issue or 5 issue limited series or something like that. Sure. But the format,
given the extra pages, it more or less evened out to be that anyway.
Yeah.
Now, when you said talk to the editor-in-chief, was that during a time when there were multiple editors-in-chief at Marvel, or was that past that, when Harrison kind of taken over?
Right. Okay. Exactly. And Ralph Macchio was the Spider-Man editor, but Tom Brevoort and I were doing sort of sideline, secondary Spider-Man stuff, limited series specials, that kind of thing, while Ralph was focused on the core books.
Okay. Did Ralph Macchio ever have to endure the indignities of being compared to the actor from The Karate Kid on any regular basis, or is it just something that me and my team do all the time?
I'll tell you a story. Just this summer, I was on like a convention tour with Ralph. My wife and I were on a convention tour with Ralph. We were in Springfield, Massachusetts, and we were at Mohegan Sun in Connecticut for two.
The Terrificon, right?
Yeah.
Oh man.
And Ralph had a table, and I had a table, and my wife was basically working as Ralph's assistant. Basically, cool. Telling people how much he was charging for autographs. She would take the money, make sure she would keep an eye on the money and all that kind of stuff. I can't tell you, especially at the Springfield, Massachusetts convention. And again, my wife. So it was me at my table, my wife sitting between me and Ralph with Ralph at his table. And I cannot tell you how many people came up to Ralph and said, "You made my childhood." And Ralph was like, "Oh, thank you. That's very." And he's thinking,
right, like because I'm the editor of a lot of Spider-Man books, yeah,
or the writing that he did, like
or
Marvel 2-in-1, with Project Pegasus and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So he goes, "Oh, you made my childhood. I've watched The Karate Kid so many times. It's just and." Ralph is looking, Ralph is like saying, okay. And I'm like looking at this fan who's gushing, and it's like, does he not realize that Ralph looks nothing like Ralph Macchio?
Yeah, it's true.
And Ralph Macchio is back playing that character on one of the most popular shows.
Exactly.
And he doesn't realize he's not the guy,
Yeah. Yeah.
So yes, it happened as
still has to-
recently as this summer. Yeah.
That's amazing. I feel so bad because I'm like, man, I'm sure he has to deal with that all the time, or it
Yeah.
never happens. It's one of those things where it's just like,
It happened
okay.
enough times where my wife had to create a sign for Ralph at the convention saying, "Not
Not
the
the Karate
Karate Kid." Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
That's great. I have an odd question. This is just me literally this is the kid in me.
Okay.
Do you remember the Spider-Man magazine that was published during during the period? I want to say it was like from 94 to 96.
You're
It
talking
was
about a
like a
full-size magazine?
full-size magazine you could
Yeah.
get in
Yeah.
like the
Sure.
grocery store.
Yeah.
I was a subscriber of that magazine, of course, but this is the kid that is doing the interview now. Is the kid who used to read that magazine and told me. But the change in the Spider-Man title physically from the original like Amazing Spider-Man 1 to the animated series title with like the jagged lettering.
Yeah.
I assume that there was no big conversation about that, or if you recall in any way, it was just like, oh, the cartoon's really big, but make it look like the cartoon.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't a matter of make it look like the cartoon. It was.
Mhm.
It was. We were post Clone Saga.
Mhm.
Ralph had just taken over as editor. Post Clone Saga. Ralph was there to wrap up the Clone Saga,
Right.
and then continue on as editor post Clone Saga.
Mhm.
And he wanted to give each book its own distinct flavor and feel and direction. And he felt the best way to do that was to give each book its own logo.
Like, okay.
And so they came up with different logos for each book. Did the animated series influence the new Amazing Spider-Man logo? I'm sure it did, but I it wasn't a matter of make it look like the animated series because it's so hot right now. It was more
Right.
like, we need a new logo. This is as good as anything. Let's just use that. And then, of course, I think it was the marketing department or advertising department, whatever. We didn't run it by them. they hit the ceiling, and of course, we had to change everything back. So,
oh really? Oh, that's funny.
At one point, everything had to get changed back.
Yeah. Apropos the Roger Stern opinion and the ongoing conversations, particularly online. I assume that in comic book stores, the non-perpetually online don't even think about this anymore, given that it's been, I want to say 20 years now since the marriage was dissolved.
Okay.
But was the issue of the marriage so contentious, editorially, creatively, even as recently as, 1997, 98, when, it was at least clear to the audience at large that it wasn't going anywhere. Like, had there been internal conversations where it was like, is this the issue? We can get rid of it. Is this how we can change it? Like, and were there voices of dissent, or was it kind of a general thing where it's like, this is the elephant in the room we have to deal with. There's nothing we can do about it. I'll do the best I can. Because it seems like with some creatives like DeMatteis, he seemed to love it. Or at the very least, he seemed to sell it in a really compelling way.
Okay, everything you just said,
yeah,
all of the above.
Okay.
All of the above. The Clone Saga was supposed to end with the dissolution of Peter and Mary Jane's marriage. That was going to be how it ended.
Oh.
And as we were getting closer to the last chapter, Ralph felt that there was going to be so much going on in the wrap up. The return of Norman Osborn, which nobody saw coming. The death of Ben Reilly, who people had come to love, which was the plan. We wanted to make you love him before we killed him. And so he felt like there was just too much going on, too much happening at the end to end with such a bummer as the dissolution of the marriage. So it was like, all right, we'll save it for later. It kept getting put off and getting put off and getting put off. And then at one point, once Howard Mackey and John Byrne were basically the main guys on Amazing Spider-Man after they did the relaunch, there was talk about getting rid of Mary Jane in one form or another. And they did a fake out. She supposedly died in a plane explosion,
plane crash. Yeah,
which
that's
was
right.
which was always going to be a fake out. I mean, they weren't going to kill her off, but they wanted to sort of like give Peter some time on his own for a while they figured out how to end the marriage once and for all.
Well, and couldn't that also have been like a focus test where it's like, let's see what the audience says, let's see how they like it. Like,
Yeah, I think
let's get a temperature read.
that's very possible. For me, my argument was always, look, Peter was always the most relatable of the Marvel heroes. What's more relatable than divorce? I mean, more than half the country, winds up in divorce. It's not the scandal. It's not the moral, shame that it was like 70 years ago,
Right.
And if anybody's going to, have an unsuccessful failed marriage and end up, getting the boot, it's going to be Peter Parker.
Right.
I felt like it made him more relatable. The argument against that was it also made him seem older. If the idea was we want a young, youthful seeming a Spider-Man, the fact that he's divorced, and I didn't buy that, because I said, how many people out there get married when they're young, and then they realize they made a horrible mistake and they're divorced within a year, and they haven't even reached 21 years old yet.
Yeah.
I said I don't agree with
Yeah, it's an older notion, but I could also see the ongoing discussion about it. That whole well, especially because it seems that the marching order, or at the very least the conjecture at the time, was keep him young, keep him
right.
you know.
And I just felt that the divorce was the bitter pill we had to swallow.
Right. This
to
is
get
what we
to where
have
we
to
wanted
do.
him to be.
Yeah. We all have to get on board. This is the way it has to be.
Right.
There's no other. It's not like we're going to have him make a deal with the devil and dissolve it out of some arbitrary decision. But
they faced the same issue we did. And that was the bitter pill that they chose. I felt the bitter pill should have been divorce. Here's the other thing, and I feel like they missed a perfect opportunity, which was they did this storyline, and this was well before the Mephisto story where he ended the marriage.
Yeah,
they did a storyline called Secret Invasion, where it was revealed that a lot of key Marvel characters had been kidnapped by the Skrulls and replaced by imposters for years, going on years. And I figured, well, if they want to end the marriage, this is the perfect way to do it. A Skrull has been posing as Mary Jane for all this time.
Right.
Including in the marriage. Peter and Mary Jane were never married.
Yeah.
And I was reminded that's basically how they got Johnny Storm out of his marriage.
Yeah, that's right. That's how they Alicia mastered him. Yeah.
But I forgot about that. So
right.
I thought that would have been
it would have been a great opportunity for them to say, like, oh no, the baby was not like taken by Norman Osborn or anything. The baby was a Skrull baby, and it was taken by the Skrulls.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it was a million ways you could have gotten around that, but no, if they didn't want to do divorce, and I get why they didn't want to do divorce, but I just felt it was the solution that was truest to Spider-Man, who's always the most grounded, in my mind.
Yeah, no, it's
of
true.
The Marvel
it's
heroes.
True. I agree. That it was the best solution of your options available, certainly.
Of all the bitter pills that you had to swallow.
Yeah. Well, especially because if you make it divorce, it is real and as you pointed out, relatable.
Yeah,
and it's easier for the audience to accept, as opposed to making it magic, where every year the audience responds by being like, well, if you magicked it away, you can magic it back. You like. It's one of those things. I happen to be a big fan of the marriage. I was very on board for it throughout, and I can recall there being a little card in many of my Marvel comics that was a little questionnaire that asked the audience all kinds of interesting probing questions, like, would you like to see Rogue and Gambit get married? Do you prefer Sabretooth as a villain or a hero? And one of them was, would you like to see Mary Jane stay together with Peter or get divorced? And I had two responses to this card. The first one was, how dare you ask me this? They should never get divorced. I love these two together. The other one was, why are you asking me, man?
Right.
Like, I'm reading these things. You don't pull back the veil. If you guys don't know, then how is anything real or true?
Your reaction, that reaction was the same reaction I had with the whole Jason Todd Robin thing.
Oh yeah.
I was actually offended. It's like, it's not for me to, I'm not going to get paid to decide if Robin lives or dies. You're getting paid. You make that decision. So I didn't, I didn't vote on that. So I had the same reaction you did. It's not for me to decide if Robin lives or dies.
Right?
It's the writers and the editors.
Yeah. I can't believe this is. I don't think you had anything to do with the with the Jason Todd decision, but man, what what an iconic and accidental situation that was. Like the death of Robin was something that they teased in like Golden Age comics, where Robin dies at dawn and all these different ideas.
Dies at dawn, right?
Like the death of Robin is something where it's like, it's so iconic that they put it in Dark Knight Returns before he actually is killed in the regular comics.
Right.
That like that trophy of the suit, like that's in that book. And then they went, oh, you know what? That's not a bad idea. Maybe he does that in the real books too. Real books, I should say, in regular continuity.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I can't imagine a world where Jason Todd would have lived. And I've read a couple of books, one actually by J.M.D. Mateus of all people.
Yeah, I just read it.
Did a whole miniseries about it. Yeah, I just read it too. And I was like, this is fun. But I can't imagine a world where Robin didn't die. You know, like, because of the image of Batman holding, Robin and having that like totem in the cave is so iconic.
Right.
It's like such a, it's for me as seminal as Gwen Stacy's death. Where it's like, this is the hero failing. This is it's not all going to be, older examples having passed before you had the power. Now you are here and and there are going to be consequences, and the perseverance of the hero is the entertaining part. But yeah, it's just so funny to think about, like, or if the guy who robocalled the number didn't have enough scratch that month, it would have been completely different. The Red Hood wouldn't exist.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I could see a scenario where Jason had lived. I think Jim Starlin, who hated the character, used him as little as possible.
Right.
But he wasn't going to be there forever. So he could have come back to prominence. But I'm not a big proponent of running those kinds of surveys, asking the readers what they think. I think that that's the province of the writer and the artist and the editor. So that's not something that I would have done for any of my books. Asking the readers what they want. But I think it's very interesting that they did that. I don't recall that. It might have been after I left, but I will say that the topic of Peter and Mary Jane's marriage ending had been in the ether for several years.
Right, like, and since it started, probably.
Was that?
Like, since it started, like since '87.
Oh yeah, well, there were a lot of people who were against it from the start. But they kept a lid on that. They didn't want to, they didn't want to show that there was dissension in the ranks.
Yeah.
But when I got to Marvel, I remember early in my days at Marvel that there was talk about, it seemed like sacrilege to say, oh, Peter and Mary Jane shouldn't be married, because they seemed so on board at Marvel,
They did. Yeah.
But secretly within the ranks, a lot of people were opposed to it. It was just a matter of, how do you do it? How do you unring this bell?
Yeah.
And, short of doing a page one reboot, which I believe John Byrne had pitched at one point.
They tried.
Yeah.
Not a full on reboot, but rather a full on retcon. But he pitched a full reboot.
He wanted to do like a full, like the Shaper of Worlds. It would involve the Shaper of Worlds coming in and basically recreating the Marvel universe, and all the books that needed adjustment,
a shakeup.
That would have been, so Peter would have been like back in high school, I think,
wow.
Because that was like the core concept of Spider-Man is the high school kid. Yeah. And if the Fantastic Four, felt like the Fantastic Four didn't need much fixing, then it wouldn't have been fixed much, or the Hulk, right, or certainly the X-Men would have remained pretty much intact, but Spider-Man would have been radically changed. And first thing to go would have been the marriage, but obviously that didn't go forward. But that was Byrne's idea, if I remember correctly.
I seem to recall the Shaper of Worlds coming up in that 101 Ways to End the Clone Saga issue that they published. So that might have been
I don't remember
something that was floated around. I don't know, but I vaguely remember that issue.
And I'm in that book. I don't remember.
Yeah, you better be.
Yeah.
It's so funny, man.
Well, the Clone Saga. I mean, the Clone Saga took up a lot of space and brain cells. And that was another one where it was a bitter pill that we had to swallow to just get to the end. And you know, nobody, only one person wanted Norman Osborn back, and he was the only person, and he's the only person whose opinion really mattered. And so, the original story was supposed to be Harry. Harry was supposed to be the mastermind behind the Clone Saga.
Interesting.
And it was decided that Harry never had the stature. He never came off as the major threat that his father was. And so it was like, it had to be Norman. It's like, Norman's dead. Norman's been dead. We saw the body. Well, you guys, I'm sure you'll figure it out. You're
creative people. So, I was going to ask about that, just the fact, skirting the clone issue, but rather just talking about the resurrection of Norman Osborn, because I can imagine that being a really sacrilegious moment.
Yeah.
But look at how many dividends it's paid since then. Like Norman Osborn, to the point where, I mean, you look at Siege, like, he was the #1 villain in the Marvel universe. He spawned a character that appears in multi-million-dollar, billion-dollar franchises.
I'm convinced, and I'm convinced. I could be 100% wrong, but I'm convinced that part of the reason why the Green Goblin was the villain in the first Spider-Man movies, because we brought back Norman, and he had become such a prominent character again in the books.
Yeah, that makes sense, because he had definitely fallen out of like the cultural consciousness as Spider-Man's greatest nemesis, because it's like in every conversation it's like, well, who's Spider-Man's greatest nemesis? And it's like, well, if you're asking me in like the mid-90s, it's going to be Venom for a minute, until he became the Lethal Protector. But like everyone goes, oh, I guess it's, maybe Doc Ock, but did he die? Is it Norman? Like, but was it Harry? I don't know.
Although I mean, the scripts that had been circulating in the early 90s, when especially when James Cameron was attached, and there had been a lot of movies and Spider-Man movies in development that just never got off the ground. But Stan Lee was involved in writing a treatment, and for the longest time the first villain was going to be Dr. Octopus. And then I think when James Cameron came in, I can't remember 100%, but I think he wanted to do the Sandman.
He did want to do he wanted to do Electro and Sandman, and there was a rumor Doc Ock was going to show up as well.
Okay.
There's a draft I read once where it was not Electro per se. It was like an electric based character that they made up out of whole cloth.
Sure.
And that was.
But the Green Goblin just wasn't in the ether at the time.
No.
So I'm convinced that us bringing him back, planted the seed for that first movie. And as opposed as I was to it, and I was, diametrically opposed to it. I was vehemently opposed to it. But some of the best times I had as a writer was after we brought him back and I got to write him.
Oh yeah, no, because he's nuts and powerful.
Yeah.
And there's a great opportunity there for insanity, and not that kind of like raving silly insanity you get with like Carnage or Venom, where it's like, he has to be kind of goofy and fun. Norman has to be calculating and interesting,
calculatingly crazy. I mean, and it fell to me to basically straighten out how this all worked. I wrote this one shot called Spider-Man the Osborn Journal.
Yeah.
Which was the whole clone saga from the moment of Norman's death up until his, he reveals himself.
Yeah.
Showing the history. And so it fell to me, and it was like, okay, I mean, it's a gig. And as much as I felt like he should have stayed dead, it was like, by the time I got done, I was like, this works in my head. He's back. Well,
and I think it helped like in a big way, like even as a kid reading it as it was coming out. And I had checked out, like during that period, once they revealed that Peter was the clone, I was like, I'm out. And this is not like a cynical, like teenager. This is a young child who also is gaining cynicism thanks to his early exposure to Image Comics, and also getting way too much information about what was going on behind the scenes about my favorite publisher at the time.
Yeah.
But I'm like, he's so every story I've read starring this character is fake. I'm out. And I left, and the only time I've checked back in was that Peter Parker issue where I'm like, I want to make sure Ben's dead, and I want to see Peter come back. And because I skipped the whole thing. I was like,
you're talking about the Peter Parker issue, the end of the Clone Saga,
the end, 75 or whatever. Yeah, the one where they reveal that Norman's back.
Yeah, but it took a lot of work to get there.
I can imagine. Oh yeah, well, and then there was that Gaunt character that's introduced that was like I'd heard was supposed to be Harry and stuff.
Gaunt was supposed to be Harry.
Yeah,
Gaunt, and it was all going to resolve, and it was Harry back. Harry. It was going to be revealed that Harry never really died.
Okay.
It's just that his body, because of that formula that he took to become the Green Goblin, his body was starting to decay, and so he's all withered, and he looks like he's all gaunt, and he looks like a corpse. And the whole thing behind the cloning and the dealing with that scientist that was helping Peter, Seward Trainer,
Seward.
All of that was to restore Harry to his original form. That's what a lot of this was headed towards. And so when we got the order that no, it can't be Harry, it has to be Norman, that whole thing got derailed.
Yeah.
And so it had to be something else. But that was going to be a big reason for the Clone Saga even existing, is because of the genetic experiments and all that kind of stuff. And it was going to be used to restore Harry. And at the end, it's Harry who becomes the Green Goblin again to fight Peter. So
that would have been fun. I feel like the resurrection of Norman Osborn, while sacrilegious, and certainly as a kid, I was like, come on. I think it did a lot to endear or to legitimize the ending, because it's like, we just got rid of all that stuff. Like the last 3 years of story, we're done. And we've brought back a classic, relatively uncomplicated villain. And he has new purpose. You killed my son. I'm in. Like, I was like, that's kind of clean. Like, it's a little,
we
caught hell. Alternatives.
we did catch hell for bringing him back.
Oh yeah,
we did catch hell. But here's the thing. I think that the initial idea was, we'll bring Norman back, reveal that he was behind it, have him burn up at the end, and just move on.
Yeah.
And I was at the meeting where all this was being discussed, and I got up and I said, no. I said, the only way, if we're going to trash one of the most important stories in Spider-Man's history, and we're going to bring this character, it cannot be for one story. And a death that is nowhere near as satisfying as his first. If we're bringing him back in this story, we need to pick up on him a few months later and start using him well.
Yeah.
If we're going to use him, let's use him well. But we should use him because it's going to just come off as really weak if we bring him back for one issue, kill him off again in a way that's not nearly as satisfying as the first death. And I got a little bit of blowback from people who were much more powerful than I was.
Sure.
But the cool thing was, a lot of the writers agreed with me. And I think J.M. DeMatteis, was Mark part of the team at that point? I don't remember if Mark was part of the team, but I'm pretty sure Ralph was on board. I'm pretty sure Ralph Macchio was on board with that. And so when DeMatteis came back to do Spider-Man on a regular basis again, he was chomping at the bit to use Norman.
Really?
So it kind
he never got to, I guess. Yeah. Norman's dead by the time he jumped on, probably.
And so now he's coming back, and now Norman is back. So yes.
Yeah.
He was like ready to sink his teeth into Norman. So that certainly helped my case. And so I mean, my feeling is that we can't bring him back for one issue, kill him off again.
Yeah.
We have to bring him back. We have to keep him around and figure out what to do with him, but just use him well.
Right.
And that's what happened.
That's funny. That's interesting. I love it, man. Thank you.
You're
man. I'm just thinking about it. I'm like, wow, yeah, that's cool. Because I was just thinking about, as a kid, I did think he died at the end of it. Like I was like, it all wraps up. Like, and now we're gonna get a fresh take and a fresh new directive and all that stuff. That DeMatteis book with Luke Ross. I think it was Peter Parker's Spider-Man again, which kept going.
It was
where it was like,
spectacular.
Spectacular.
Spider-Man.
That's it.
Yeah, it was
Yeah,
him and
I
Luke
have.
Ross.
Yeah. I have a page for that run because I was just it was one of those things where that was my goodbye. It was I think at 241 where I was like, I'm out. They Pete and Mary Jane get Aunt May's house. Aunt May is dead. The baby's gone. But we're back. We're getting back to basics. And I was like, good to know that everything worked out. And now I can leave this book forever.
So you didn't come back on a regular basis?
No, I stayed away for a long time after that. But that
so you missed all my stuff then?
I did. I missed the Gathering of Five. I missed Identity.
No, I bailed out before Gathering of Five.
Oh, good.
I didn't want to be part of that. But I took over. Yeah. Oh, I took over after DeMatteis left.
Oh, no kidding. Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah, those are the fun years with like the kangaroo and stuff like that.
The kangaroo. We did the Goblins at the Gate, which was Norman Osborn versus Roderick Kingsley. So it was the original Green Goblin versus the original Hobgoblin.
That's some good stuff. No,
that was my
stuff.
I
went back. I went back and picked it up. Thanks to actually, it's funny. As a kid, I got like a CD-ROM of every Amazing Spider-Man comic ever made, and I was like, I don't remember where I was at the time in my life, but I saw it and I bought it for like a song, and I'm like, it was amazing. Like, how is this legal?
Yeah,
and I just read from 1 to
300,
whatever the hell.
Plus,
it must have been at least not 500 because.
No, it was already out by then.
Yeah, but it was over 400. It was like 450 or something like that. It was
really that far. So it had the death of Aunt May.
Oh yeah, no, it definitely had the death of Aunt May.
Yeah.
But I got a chance to check in on all those your run as well, which was a lot of fun. And it was one of those things. I remember I read a lot of Wizard during that time, to kind of keep my finger on the pulse of of the world, which is a biased pulse, but certainly at least they had to check in.
They were sharpening their knives all the time.
They were not favorable. They were like, now they're like, it's too goofy. I'm like, I could use some goofy. I could use some joy in this series for a little while.
Yeah.
And that was and X-Man and his involvement with Pete and stuff like that. You worked on like at least a dozen issues of X-Man, right?
Yeah, I was the editor of that in my last year or so at Marvel. Yeah,
was because I like, it's funny because I remember like there for a certain subset of people, like I can imagine some folk are like, no, Daredevil's Spider-Man's best friend, but if you grew up in the 90s, X-Man was like a really close friend of Peter's,
right?
And was that your doing? Was that your kind of like, let me bridge those?
No, I really didn't have much to do with that. I mean, I think that was established before I took over as editor.
Okay.
And I don't even recall there being any interaction between Nate and Peter during my time on X-Man.
Gotcha.
So no, that was stuff that was done outside of my realm.
Gotcha.
I just wanted to, my whole goal was trying to figure out who Nate Gray was and what made him stand out amongst all the other X-Men books, and to find justification for his book to exist.
Right.
So that was what I was really focused on is what is his place in the X universe. And I don't think I ever really cracked it, before I left the company.
Yeah.
At that point, it was just like just tell good stories, and and do no harm.
Yeah.
Was my approach.
I like that. Do no harm. That's funny. I'll have to check out Goblins of the Gate. I never actually read Goblins of the Gate. It's a.
Do you have the Hobgoblin Lives the more recent trade paperback or the original trade paperback?
I think I have the original trade paperback.
Okay, they reprinted Hobgoblin Lives about 10, 12 years ago. It was a new printing of Hobgoblin Lives, and Goblins at the Gate is in that trade paperback.
Oh, that's cool. All right,
because it's the sequel. It is a sequel to Hobgoblin Lives, so they're all together in one book. So if you get your hands on that.
Yeah, I will, definitely. I mean, there is a real possibility that I already have it. Like, there's a real possibility that I have Goblins of the Gate actually in like my long boxes. When this became a full-time job, like I bought books aggressively. Not just trades, but also like, there's a comic book store about like less than an hour away from me, and they like created an annex where they have their own shop, and it's like 70 long boxes or more, just full of dollar bins, and those dollar books have no business being $1. It's just that he buys like every collection that comes his way. So like he just goes, all right, I grabbed the keys and the rest of them are a book. Like just throws them into that area. So it's like you get books that are like like that's a first appearance of so and so, so like that should not be here.
Uh-huh.
And so I'll leave with like short boxes and then I just put them over there.
he must love you.
Oh yeah, no, it's true. But
and you must love him.
Oh no, it's amazing. No, I see it as like a treasure trove because that's like I love comic book stores, but like one of my favorite aspects of comic shops is just getting a chance to leaf through bins of books that are affordable.
Right.
You know, nothing broke my heart more as a kid than like seeing an ocean of long boxes and then like picking up the first one and seeing like a $20 price tag on it.
Right.
Oh man.
Yeah.
Like I'm never gonna read this. Because it's just I'm a kid. I have like, you know, it's like my choice is either to have lunch or or buy this one issue. And it's like, you know, especially back then, it's like, oh well, trade paperbacks are the same price as this one key. Forget about it.
I remember in the mid '80s, a comic book store that I used to go to a lot was selling the first part of the Death of Gwen Stacy for $20, and I could not resist because it was in really good condition, and it was $20, and that was the most I'd ever spent on a comic book in my life. And my first order of business is make sure my parents never find out about that. You know,
I did the exact same thing. I know exactly what you're talking about. I have a couple of books that I needed to have. Like I have the first appearance of Carnage, which I just got because it was cool.
Yeah.
Like because back then they were like, well, Carnage is so disposable. Who cares? You know, I'm like, well, that's mine. Secret Wars 8, I had to have as a kid, and that was like I think it was $5 when I was a kid. I was like, oh well, I have two of those.
Well. The first appearance of Carnage, I mean, when it came out, I was not at Marvel yet, but I was on my way into getting at Marvel. And the first appearance sold like hotcakes. I mean, you could not find it anywhere.
Really? Because I just have it. Like it's just in my collection from like having bought Marvel at the time. Like, I might have drawn in it for the for all I recall. Like it's
if you didn't already have it on your pull list, you could not get that issue. I mean, I think I was lucky. I managed to snag like, you know, the last copy of, you know, whatever store I was at, but it was sold like hotcakes. It was really hard to get. So
it's funny. For me, there was always like a litmus test for whether a book was ever going to be worth anything. And that's why I really always discounted or discredited the first appearance of Carnage, because it had one of those like, now it wasn't foil, but it had like that kind of iridescent cover to it. It was like a little silver. If there's a cover gimmick, I'm like, well, it's probably worthless. And I was right for a long time about some of those books, like the first appearance of the Spider Armor. I was like, I don't need that. Now it's, damn it.
Oh, did it go up in value, that one?
It did go up in value because it's in video games and and you know, the Spider-Verse movies and stuff like that. So yeah, I know. It's you gotta keep checking. You never know.
You know what? I'd rather not, because I don't want to know what I missed out on. You know what I mean? Because I've given away a lot of stuff, and it's gotten back to me how much some of that stuff is worth right now. The first comic book appearance of Harley Quinn, I gave it away. You know,
well, because it was a prestige book that was like, you know, practically packaged with like VHSs. You know, it was like, how could I assume this would ever be worth anything?
I mean, and there's certain issues of Batman the Batman animated series comic book that I think I got rid of. I think I gave, like, except for like one or two like annuals or very special issues that I liked, I got rid of like the whole series. And I know that's a lot of those issues are now like skyrocketed in price. So it's like, what are you gonna do?
That's true. It's like it's gone. It's done.
It's gone.
You know,
it's done.
I had fun. I'm glad I had it. You know, I was a steward of it for a while. You know.
Yeah.
Now it's in a slab in someone's basement.
Yeah.
For all time, until their kid inherits it and goes, I don't know what the hell this is, and just sells them at a garage sale.
Yeah.
But Glenn, it was so great to have you. Thank you. I don't want to take up too much of your time. I want to thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure.
We got to keep this. We got to do this again. We got to do like monthly check-ins where we just talk about. You know, we literally spend 10 minutes talking about font. Like, there's no way we we you know. Touched upon here, there's so much. Onslaught, Heroes Reborn, the Heroes Return Initiative, Age of Apocalypse. You know, there's a ton, and of course we'll probably inevitably talk about Spider-Man again.
Sure,
but yeah, man, great to have you. What's next? What are you working on, and where can people find you?
I'm most active on Facebook. I mean, if you want to look me up on Facebook, I'm easy to find there. In terms of upcoming work, I work at my 9 to 5 job is I'm the marketing copywriter for an educational publishing company. So that's my main focus. Anything else is just like sort of gravy.
Gotcha.
I was very busy over the last few years. I think we talked about this last time, doing these bookazines, like they're like nonfiction books. That seems to have dried up. It seems like the only bookazine topics that anybody wants to read about right now are either Donald Trump or Taylor Swift.
Right.
And I'm not well equipped to write about either topic.
That's
So
fair.
once the tide turns back towards the Beatles, or comic book stuff, or Star Wars or Star Trek, if it moves back towards that, I think I'll have a future again writing bookazines. But right now, it seems like that market is kind of soft.
Gotcha.
So I'm just enjoying the free time that I have.
Good. Yes. Well, it frees you up to be on shows like these. So I'm grateful for the opportunity.
Sure. Me too.
Well, thanks for being here, man. Thanks for watching, everybody. And we'll see you guys next time here on Comic Pop.